Trade Talk TV. This week we were joined by Adit from Visual IQ. Welcome.
Thank you.
Adit, could you just tell us who Visual IQ are?
Sure. So we're a company that has been around since about 2006, and we're pure play focused on the problem of attribution, which is essentially helping advertisers figure out what is really happening with my media, what's working, what's not working, not just looking at the direct effects, but looking at the cross-channel effects. One of the things that we do that's a little bit different is that we don't just look at digital, we look at digital as well as offline. Okay. And if you look at some of the research that's been done by Forrester and others, they did a big attribution paper last year where Visual IQ did extremely well on both the digital as well as offline attribution vendor landscape. So that's basically where we play. We don't buy media, we're totally unbiased and neutral, and that's kind of the positioning in the market.
A pure play attribution modeling vendor type thing.
That's right, that's right.
So the attribution modeling has been around since the days of Atlas and engagement mapping. I remember from the old days of Atlas, when it was a dominant force. But what's changed? Like, where are we right now? We're still talking about attribution modeling kind of like 7-8 years later.
Yeah, I think a few things that have changed is that there's a lot of companies that are actually now dipping their toes in attribution. In the US, the way it started was with the engagement mapping and just saying, hey, if I use simple rules to change the allocation of credit from the last click to something different, what would the world look like? I think where the world is going now is people are taking more of a science-based approach, and they're trying to really understand, is this just insight or can I actually use it on an ongoing basis when my campaigns are in market? And so I think the conversation of attribution is moving from an analytical conversation to an operational conversation.
Okay, yeah, it has felt up to now, it creates another stream of analysis and another stream of data, which just becomes nice to have afterthoughts rather than how do you make it impact on your day-to-day kind of campaign management.
Exactly right.
So that's kind of the introduction, but let's get into the whiteboard. Could you map out the approach to Visual IQ's approach to attribution modeling?
Sure, happy to. So I think what I'll do is I'll try and lay out both what is different about Visual IQ, because clearly there's a lot of people talking about attribution, and also give you a sense of how do you actually solve this problem from a practitioner's point of view in a way that you can actually take action. If we start off with attribution, as I mentioned, we don't just do digital attribution, we do digital as well as offline. We'll start with the holistic view, what we call top-down attribution. And what you're essentially doing here is you're looking at stimulation and the channels that are used to provide stimulation. So here you have your offline channels, you have your online channels. You might have stimulation you don't control, like seasonality. You might have competitors. And on the other side, you've got response. And over here, you've also got your offline response, your online response, and you might have other indirect response. Like, for example, if you're a CPG company, the way in which the response happens is through a retail store, so it's a little bit more indirect. All of this goes into a huge data platform. And what Visual IQ is doing is helping you sort out all of this different data to build something that you can then do analytics on top of. So we take this data and basically build an econometric model that allows you to build analytics. So think of this as essentially a statistical or econometric model. And the point of the model is to find causal relationship between stimulation and response. Now, the key difference here is that this is not just an analytical exercise. The results of this are going into a software platform that allows you to also do scenario planning.
Can you give an example of the type of scenarios that?
Yeah. So the key thing here is that when you go into the beginning of a campaign cycle, you're trying to say, I've got X amount of budget and I want to allocate it based on my goal. My goal is to drive conversions, is to drive reach, whatever your goals may be. And what the scenario planning tool is it's basically a decision support tool that says, given this model and given the performance of your media in the past, this is the best way in which you can allocate this budget. And so coming out of this, you end up with a media plan. Now, this approach has been around for a while. There are actually third parties that do this that we've integrated with in the past. So this, if you have a vendor, you have an approach to this, we can integrate with that. But the key shortcomings with this kind of an approach typically has been two. The first has to do with the frequency of refresh.
As in the big kind of data sets that have been looked at, big projects happen
once a year, twice a year, and when you do it once or twice a year, you can't actually use it in market when your campaigns are actually running. So that's been one of the limitations. The other limitation has been the granularity of the recommendation. Why? Because typically, especially with digital channels, it's very hard to capture the volatility and the fragmentation that exists in digital channels using this approach. Which brings us to Visual IQ's approach. So we have solved both of these problems. The first is, because of the way in which we do this, we can update these models on a monthly cadence. And the second thing is, we can combine this econometric approach with digital attribution, what we call bottom-up attribution. And what you're doing here is, rather than using a statistical approach, you're actually observing user behavior at the user level. So you're basically building a set of touch points for all your converters. Imagine every one of these is a touch point. And then you're also doing this for all of your non-converters.
Not meaning to go into the science of causality, but like how important is that distinction to actually start understanding the things that trigger an event?
Yeah, that's critical. Because if you only look at conversions, the analogy that I often give is, if you're trying to understand what makes a good basketball player, and you only look at basketball players, you'll miss one really important criteria, which is you have to be tall. Why? Because everybody you look at is tall. Same principle applies here. To really understand what is working for a converter, you need to compare converters with non-converters, first of all. And the second is you need to be able to do model validation on data you've never seen before. In other words, you need to be able to take your model and predict who is more likely to convert and test whether that prediction actually works or not.
So there's a degree of predictive analytics being kind of built into some of these, I guess, the scenario planning that you're talking about, so forecasting and that kind of thing?
That's right, exactly. So whether you're using the top-down or the bottom-up model, the key here is that here as well you're talking about a huge data exercise, because when we look at a touch point, we're not just simply capturing the channel, we're capturing the recency, the frequency. Sorry, I'm writing this really small just because I'm going to run out of room here. But we're capturing a set of attributes associated with every one of these touch points. What's the recency, what's the frequency, who's the publisher, what's the creative.
Yep.
And what the model is fundamentally doing is it's saying which permutations and combinations of these attributes actually leads to increased propensity to convert. And this is a massive data exercise. For some of our clients, we're processing 2 terabytes of data per day.
Per client?
Per client. Wow. So this is a massive, again, data management exercise. On top of which is the algorithmic model.
And you know, there are lots of facets to kind of this space of attribution modeling, but again, this is quite important, right, in the sense of back in when the first models came out, it was kind of like select which one suits your needs.
That's right.
Rather than trying to actually find out what will tell you the right result versus trying to just decide it for yourself. Exactly,
and that's the key change in what the market is asking for over the last, let's say, 2 to 3 years. Is that basically this is now the market standard, is moving towards science-based models that actually use your data to try and tell you what to do. So the results of this model as well flow into the same software platform as this piece, and we have a scenario planning tool that runs on this model as well. Except that now I'm giving you a media plan that is extremely granular in nature. Now we're talking about recommendations at the placement and keyword level.
So keyword, from search perspective, we were able to start saying, what are these brand terms versus brand generics versus long tail? It's down to that level of granularity.
That's right. So we're actually able to tell you how is your display programs, for example, affecting specific keywords or specific interactions, not just at the channel level, but also at the creative level, for example. You know, because you have attribution effects going on with certain creatives that do a good job of building awareness, other creative that does a good job of helping your audience compare you to your competition, and other creative that actually helps them to take action. And you have those kind of cross-channel effects going on as well. So the final thing is, how do you take these 2 different approaches and integrate them?
Yeah.
Because this is obviously using different data. And so that is another problem that we have solved. And the way we do that is, number one, we can use these kind of halos that capture longer term effects to adjust out some of the digital conversions that are not actually attributable to digital stimulation. It's the real attribution of these digital conversions is through your offline media.
Yep.
So we can take that, adjust it. And the second thing is when we do this scenario planning to build a media plan, we don't start from zero. We'll start with the media plan that you got from your top-down model and use the digital model, which is much more granular, to then further refine it, allow you to move little budget from here to there. But by doing those two different things together, you have a holistic view that you can operationalize at sort of the seasonal, quarterly, monthly cycles, and you can use these models to optimize at the monthly, weekly, daily levels. And so it supports all your planning cycles.
And how open is the platform to ingest supplementary kind of data sources? So if you go to this kind of placement level, let's say an impression that was never seen, how valuable is that in a path to conversion? So can you start overlaying viewability factors?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you can, into this touchpoint stack, you can add whatever level attributes you want. So that would essentially be another attribute of a touchpoint.
Right.
So rather than simply discarding it, we can impose a attribute to that touchpoint saying, this was not viewed, or whatever the attribute might be. In some cases, we've actually included offline touchpoints that can be connected at a user level. For example, direct mail, or a response that you get on a call center where you can connect that call center response to a specific user. So this framework is fairly open and fairly flexible, and you can add different kinds of touch points depending on how you track and how you manage your users.
Quick question for you, which won't be on a whiteboard, but how real-time do you think attribution modeling can be? Because we're moving to an environment of media which has become increasingly real-time traded. But can this type of thing be done on a real-time basis?
Yes, absolutely. So we're actually already doing that. What we're able to do is, as you start to look at your planning cycles, you've got multiple planning cycles, right? You have planning cycles where you're starting a campaign, you're trying to say, how do I allocate budget? Then you put the money in market, you're executing, and now you want to optimize at different levels of granularity. So what we can do is we can take this very detailed media plan and feed it back to the bid management systems, both on the search side as well as on the DSP side. Because if you really think about what multi-touch attribution or the kind of approach Visual IQ is taking, is that for this population, this non-converting population, we can start to tell you, based on these touch points, who is more likely to convert. So and you can use that to go and bid for that cookie on the DSP.
We believe the propensity is going to lead to this kind of outcome, so adjust your media buying on the basis of that. Okay.
Or you can say, I believe this particular user is more likely to convert. If you see them somewhere, go bid higher for them, because based on the sequence of touch points, I know they're more likely to convert.
Okay, well, that's a great overview, and so thanks for coming in today, and thanks for tuning into this week's Trade Talk.
Thanks for having me.